Thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be here and sitting next to people with Muhammad Yunus on my left who have started more businesses than I know I can even count. I'm going to leave reality to him and start with some macroeconomics just to give us a little bit of an overview, but I'm sure we're going to hear and I'm going to learn a lot from the panel, so I'm delighted to be here. Small business has a very important role to play in the SDGs, but so does medium business and so does large business. So I want to start us off by making a point, which is that we shouldn't be ideological, in my opinion, about small, medium, and large. We should understand that the size distribution of businesses is like the size distribution of cities or the size distribution of many other phenomena in society, which reflects underlying forces of the market economy. There are reasons for small business and there are reasons for large business. And what we have is a kind of ecosystem, if you want to call it that, where there is a pattern. The vast majority of enterprises, if you count them as one by one, will be very small businesses in any country. In Europe or the United States or Africa or any place else, 90+% of businesses will be small businesses. But in terms of employment will be roughly a third in most places between small, medium, and large enterprises, depending on exact definitions and where you draw the line. And it's impressive that these patterns replicate over time and across countries. There are deeper reasons for them. And the same is true, by the way, if you look at the size distribution of cities in any country over time. It's been noted for 75 years that there is a pattern of city size distribution that often follows what's called Zipf's law, which is uncannily reflected in country after country and replicated over time. All of this is to say, don't set your heart on one kind of enterprise being the essence of development or the essence of solutions or the source of employment or the location of value-added creation. Their small and large businesses will coexist, and they will mutually exist where large businesses operate together with small suppliers, customers, and so forth in an ecosystem of size distribution. A second obvious point is that the role of small business differs across sectors. Some sectors, by nature of technology, are inherently large companies because there are big economies of scale. Utilities companies, major industrial firms in heavy industry are large, typically because there are significant technological economies of scale. Whereas in wholesale and retail trade, you may have a vast proportion of employment as well as number of firms in small and medium enterprises. Of course, with technological change, boundaries and the nature of increasing returns to scale will change. When new technologies come, it's possible that what used to be large scale can become small scale. So when we make the transition from coal-fired power plants to photovoltaics, we are likely to be making a transition from large companies to a large number of small companies. And so this is also part of the nature of technological change. We should talk about obviously specifics of small enterprises. They have their own nature by definition of being small. They can't internalize a lot of risk. They can't bear social burdens very much. They can't self-insure their workers in a way a large enterprise can do. And so small enterprises have intrinsic features that make them different from large and also suggest public policies that I think are important. For example, in the United States, a lot of healthcare is essentially financed at the firm level. This is not a very good model. It's a model that the US stumbled into for a number of reasons in the 1940s particularly. But a better model is public financing of education, of healthcare, rather than firm-based financing. And so a lot of what makes firms thrive or not thrive depends not only on their size and their sector, but on the broader policy environment around them. And I personally believe we should be continuing to focus on primarily public financing of health, primarily public financing of education, primarily public financing of infrastructure, despite all of the rhetoric around us of privatization. Most of that rhetoric is coming from private financial markets that don't really pay too much attention about poor people or about universal coverage. And so a lot of the rhetoric about the privatization of services, in my view, is misplaced and is often America-based. And the fact of America is that lots of people are excluded from basic services in the United States, and that's because they've been privatized to an important extent. But from the point of view of our topic of small and medium enterprise, I think the socialization of responsibility for health, education, and other phenomena leaves the small firms to be able to do what they do, which is the particular economic niche without having to fund the health care or the social security of their workers. Of course, small firms often in poor countries have a question of formalization. Are they legally registered? Are they paying taxes? What are the benefits of doing so? In general, formalization, in my view, is important. Creating a legal framework is important. The information revolution that we're enjoying makes it possible to do this because now information costs have fallen so sharply that small companies can be part of the information system of good governance in ways that were not possible before. Small companies have distinct challenges of financing. And sitting next to Muhammad Yunus, I shouldn't even say more, but he's going to talk about that. He invented microfinance because very, very small business people who, A, didn't know they were business people or that they were entrepreneurs until he told them, had no mechanism of finance. So you had to invent a new kind of finance. That kind of invention of financing is ongoing because technology is our friend in this, in my view. And financial inclusion becomes easier and easier in an online era, in my understanding. But I'm, again, going to defer to the real experts that are on this panel. There's another feature about small companies that is not so much about small companies, but about one type of small company that I think is very important, and that is startup companies. You mention them in the same context because inherently, almost inherently, startups are small. It's hard to start large. So there are special issues of startups that are important, which is that there is that valley of tears in any startup of anything we do in life, which is surviving until you get on your feet. And that raises lots of questions about the organization of startups. I mention startups not only because they're a general economic phenomenon, but they're essential to the success of the Sustainable Development Goals. Because to achieve sustainable development, we need lots of innovation, and lots of companies doing things that they weren't doing before. And so we need startups inherently for taking on new challenges. But starting up is hard. Most startups fail, of course. And a lot of institutional innovation is about how to address startup needs. I think one of the great developments in the US business systems 50 years ago onward was venture capital, which was a distinct form of industrial organization for high-tech startups. I think it's proven its worth. Very few places in the world have venture capital to speak of. Venture capital is not only lending to a high-tech company, but it's a special way of organizing management and oversight of that lending so that you can pool resources into highly risky but highly innovative companies. We should talk about creating venture capital or quasi-venture capital even in low-income settings. What is the best way to do that? And finally, I want to come back to the idea that changing technology by itself changes the size distribution of firms. We know from economic history that very large enterprises really came to be a major part of the economy at the end of the 19th century because of technological changes. A lot of heavy industrialization came because of the Industrial Revolution and the capacity to benefit from massive economies of scale at a technological level. Probably our technological change now is working in the other direction. It's creating networks rather than giant firms. It's lowering transactions costs and probably making it likely that small enterprises can flourish in a way that was not possible before if they're information-based rather than heavy industrial-based. So maybe we'll see a kind of flowering of small enterprises made possible by information technology, and I want to put that on the table as well. So those are just some points that I think we ought to discuss, and I will turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. It's always very inspiring to listen to you, but I will still provoke you with a question. Were the SDGs crafted with the small businesses in mind?
Were the SDGs drafted with small business in mind? If you read the Agenda 2030, small business is mentioned, certainly. Of course, small businesses are on people's minds because they're an important part of the economy. But I don't think that the SDGs were primarily drafted for that reason. I think the SDGs were primarily drafted for the purpose of integrating a desperate need for getting climate change under control and environmental damage under control, together with the imperatives of health and education and the ideas of job creation for the vast population of young people in the world. That's the real motive of the SDGs, is that we've got a very complicated, integrated agenda that has to link social, economic, and environmental considerations. And the SDGs play a role in that. For some people, maybe the preeminent role. But my view is start with the problem we're trying to solve and then work backward to what are potential solutions, of which small and medium enterprises are certainly part of the solution space.
I would like to share my story that actually drove me into founding up my startup. So I grew up in the global south, in a developing country, Bangladesh. And growing up, I have seen how marginalized people, millions of them, work in indecent working conditions in private sector firms to earn $2 against 16 hours a day of work. And because for these people, losing their jobs is more fearful than losing their lives. because for them, inclusion in the formal market is a very big issue. And for the major European and American fashion brands, they are actually not human beings. They are cheap labor. And let me tell you, there are 3.2 millions of this cheap labor working in 5,000 different factories in my country. And there are 1.2 billions of them scattered in different corners of the world. And they work for countless hours for criminally low wage, just to make sure that the trendiest clothes are available in stores within 5 days of placing the order by the fast fashion brands. What inspired me particularly is one of those 5,000 factories in my country was Rana Plaza. And Rana Plaza had over 3,600 employees working in the disastrously broken infrastructure because they were threatened by their employers that they will be kicked out of their jobs. On 24th April 2013, Rana Plaza collapsed along with 1,134 cheap labor. And it's been 3 years, but I still feel like these people did not die simply because of the cracked walls. It's also because, their lives had lost value simply because they were trapped in the informal economy without any dignity, any inclusion, any access to finance, any independence of choices. So that incident actually moved me to think that, why these people are trapped in the informal economy? What should be how should we fill this gap? And it also raised a question to myself that what are the job practices of the factories that practice this modern day slavery? And then last year I got to meet one of the victims of Rana Plaza who was still working in a factory to sustain her $4 living. And when I met her, I tried to encourage her to utilize her skills and experience to be an entrepreneur, because that could potentially give her a better income and also a safer life. But then I got to know a different story through her eyes, and that was the story of invisibility. Her name is Halima, and she said that I'm too invisible to my employers, to the clients, to the world at large. No one knows about us. And then that made me ponder that if these underprivileged yet highly skilled people could gain access to the formal market, they could potentially generate a greater income and endless opportunities. So that's where my startup, social startup, synergyglobal.co's online platform comes in. Because through our platform, we make these invisible people like Halima visible by giving them a global identity in the realm of internet. Through our platform, we try to connect these marginalized seamstresses and tailors living in the slums of Dhaka with the global market of ethical fashion. Ethical fashion brands can submit their designs, our entrepreneurs work on them, and we ship it back. But most importantly, what my startup does is they bring these entrepreneurs, this marginalized cheap labor out of the indecent working conditions and give them the independence, the empowerment. It gives them the authority to make choices about their income, their earning opportunities, their contribution. And I realized that maybe my startup is a very small player in the private sector, but it's an honor for me to quantify the impact of my startup by bringing in freedom and independence to the marginalized people, by giving them inclusion, and also by being part of the growing revolution for ethical fashion. And now that millennials are spending $48.5 billion in ethical fashion as I speak, this is evidence that we have the power to make greater impact. If I want to conclude, I would like to say that if we consider development as a puzzle, we all are scattered little pieces of that puzzle, and we all have a role to play. So, those of us who have the power to make choices, we have to make choices for those who do not have that power, and that is 1.2 billion of people in the world. And I completely acknowledge that how difficult it is for the large-scale private sectors to maintain the perfection of their value chain and the actors therein. But it's also important to ask ourselves that despite having private sector interventions, why we still have people around us who live under $4 a day? That's because private sector is creating jobs, but they're not creating inclusive or decent jobs. They're not addressing the sustainable development goals. So my recommendation is the private sector should stand on two pillars, the sustainable development goals and also the promotion of ethical consumption. And we need to realize that labor is never cheap. The value that we pay to this hardworking labor is very cheap. And from the consumer perspective, I know that it might seem like investing in ethical fashion is a luxury, but if I recall the incident of Rana Plaza, I think I am equally responsible for that incident, because when we consumers throw away the labels with cheap price tags written made in Bangladesh, we never actually ask ourselves that who made our clothes so cheap, to what expense and return. Was it a seamstress starving half a day? Was it her life? So as smart global citizens, we need to ask ourselves these questions. I really appreciate how the EU Consensus on Development and the Addis Ababa Agenda, they appraise private sectors to include SDGs in the course of making profits. And I believe that it's time we commit. It's time we commit to be more responsible as citizens. It's time we commit to ourselves, to the underprivileged, to empower them, to the SDG 2030 agenda. Because it's us, when we, the scattered little pieces of that puzzle, come together, empower the underprivileged, take the right roles, that's when we get to solve the development puzzle and we have a better and developed world.
First, I wanted to congratulate Tasneem for raising these issues here in a forum like this. One piece of information I would like to add to what she said you are buying these cheap clothes from Bangladesh. Probably you bought it for $50. But you don't remember, probably you don't find out how much that we sold it for. Bangladesh factory sold it for. It sold it for $5, and you paid $50. So if that $50 could, a simple sharing of that $50 additional money could be passed on to the workers, their life will be completely different. So this is where the gap is, where the missing part of the whole thing. Let me proceed with the issue that you raised. The finance has been a very important issue. And I got involved with it without realizing what I got getting into. I started lending money just to protect people from loan sharks. And I was doing it from my own pocket, lending money to them, so that they don't have to go to the loan shark. And that created the whole wave of activities around it and created a bank out of it, called it Grameen Bank, and so on, lending money. And it created a lot of questions in my mind, and I raised those questions. I said, financial system is not working for poor people at all. They are nowhere near them. So here we asked some questions. What are the important issues? You gave your answers. And my experience tells me over years that finance is the economic oxygen for people. Like if you don't have oxygen in this room, we'll be gasping. We'll have a difficulty in breathing. And if you don't have oxygen in everyday life, you'll be sick, you'll be paralyzed, you can't function. So that oxygen, the financial oxygen, the economic oxygen, is not available to people. And those who are not privileged to get access to that oxygen, they remain paralyzed. And we blame them. We say they're lazy, they're not working, they're not earning their money. But we forgot that we have not provided the oxygen for which they are gasping. If we provide that oxygen, they will be just like any other active person. They will take care of themselves and contribute to the society and so on. So this is not being done with the financial institution that we have created for ourselves. This is the problem that we created. Today, Grameen Bank has become a big bank. It's nationwide. It's 9 million women receiving that finance. It's an exclusively women-focused bank. And people keep asking me question, how did you design this bank? the others thought cannot be done. But what are the elements that you put into it? I try to think about it. What is the element that goes into that thing? And I come up with the kind of answer the way people would probably understand it easier. I said, well, I look at the conventional banks, how they do it. When I need a policy, when I need a procedure, how to do the banking, because I don't know anything about banking. So I look at the conventional banks, how they do it. Once I learn how they do it, I just do the opposite. And it works out. They go to the rich, I go to the poor. Very simple thing. And they work in the city center, I go to the remote village. They look for men, I go for women. They look for collateral. You have to have something before you get something from the bank. I said, forget it. So we don't have any collateral in our system. So we've just eliminated from the whole system. Since we don't have collateral, we don't need any legal papers. Since we don't need any legal papers, we don't have any lawyers. So we are the only bank in the world which is lawyer-free. We don't need any piece of legal paper. And we give out billions of dollars. Annually, we give out $2.5 billion in loan without any papers. And people say, you're going into big risk. I said, I never see any risk. I've been doing it for 42 years. It never failed. It works. Not only it works in Bangladesh, it works in other countries also. We had no problem there. So I challenge those things. Why the financial system has to be done in a certain way, it cannot be done other way. So we're keeping raising that these are the barriers which pushed all the conditionalities into a situation where the poor people cannot get into the system. So the system has been built for the privileged people. So if the banking system, the way we have that, is built for the rich people, we need a different kind of banking for the poor people because it doesn't work for that way. So we need a different kind of institution. That's a focus, that the finance cannot be just open up the door and do that because they're not built for that purpose. I said conventional banks are like super tankers. They go to the deep ocean with lots of cargoes. And that's what they do. They make big money. That's what the conventional banks do. I said, what we talk about the credit that we gave, $20, $30, $50 to people, we need the dinghy boat. We don't need super tankers. So the architecture of a super tanker, if you apply to a dinghy boat, it will never work. Dinghy boat has a separate structure, separate architecture. Once you do that, then it will work for people. This is an example. It's not just for a year, for 2 years. It's going on. It's replicated, imitated globally, and continue to do that. So the financing cannot just open up just because some policymaker said, let's open up the door for all the banks to do that. You can force the bank, the super tankers, you can force them to do that, but they cannot function it because that's not the way it has been designed. You have to design things for the appropriate purposes, for the kind of thing that you need to do. So what people raise questions that, you think poor people can take money and make a life for themselves? I said, yes, why not? If they can do that, why should you object to that? No, they are not entrepreneurs. I said, what does it mean? Oh, not everybody is an entrepreneur. I said, how do you make it out? I said, I lend money to anybody who is a poor person, who is a woman. I lend it money. I never asked, are you an entrepreneur? That question doesn't make any sense to them. So I never asked that question. I never reject anybody. So why do you say you have to do banking for the poor people by choosing entrepreneurial people? So I defied that thing. And then I came to a conclusion myself, in my own way. I said, all human beings are entrepreneurs, no exception. Simply, system has made them forget that. It's deeply buried inside of them. It's never brought out. The system told you to work for somebody else. That's why we always talk about job creation. We're not talking about entrepreneurship, because that's what we are. We are human beings, we are entrepreneurs, we are creative people, but the system is made for working for somebody else. Somebody else who? Who are we working for? Working for people who will suck up all the wealth in the world and keep it to themselves. And that's what we're working for. So we became a sort of mercenaries for those people, the people who will grab everything and make it happen. That's a system, that financial system is the vehicle through which we mop up all the wealth and take it to the top. the top 1% who owns the 99% of the wealth today. Tomorrow, it will be worse and continue to do that. So I came out with the idea that why not look at them as an entrepreneur so that they can get themselves disconnected from the system to push the wealth to somebody else. I keep the wealth to myself. If I'm an entrepreneur, I'm not the $2 a day workers selling the product for $5 to Europe and somebody selling it to $50, make all the money for themselves. I'm not in that system. I disconnect myself. And that's what she's trying to do, get this worker to become independent entrepreneur. So if you can disconnect them, so the whole system has to reverse itself. If we become entrepreneurs, then I face this problem because I want, not only we're lending money to women, we wanted to make sure their children, every children born into Grameen families, go to school. Because all of them, all 9 million of them, are illiterate. So we said, illiteracy stops here. It's our task as a bank. See, as a bank, it's our task. We defined our task to make sure their children go to school. And we made very elaborate program for that. So responsibility of every staff is to make sure the borrower, how many borrowers he or she is serving, every child in his school. That's his responsibility or her responsibility. And we made it successful. They were in school. They did continue. Some continued in higher education. We gave them education loan. Then the question came, there is no job. Again, I faced the same issue. What I faced with their mothers, I faced with their children. I said, why are you looking for jobs? I tell them that job is a very wrong idea. It's a wrong idea for the whole world. So don't get involved with that. Disconnect yourself from the job. We are not born to work for anybody else. We are born to make things happen for ourselves. We are a creative being. We do things for things that change the world. That's what we do. That's our job. So I keep telling that we are not job seekers, we are job creators. And create social business fund and invite them to come up with business ideas. And in the beginning, they say, whoa, we don't have business ideas. I said, what a shame. Your illiterate mother, 20 years back, 25 years back, when she joined Grameen Bank, she came up with an idea. And she took a big challenge of taking $30 loan and make her idea take place, materialize it, implement it. And you went to school, you got your graduation, you said you don't have an idea. I said, what good is your education if you're not even as good as your illiterate mother? So we shame them, say, if you don't know what to do, go back to your mother, learn from her, and come up with the idea. But we are standing by with money. Now they're opening up, they're coming up, hundreds of them in the beginning, a month, thousands of them now, and by the end of the year, 2,000 a month, and so on. Now we have 17,000 of these young people already in business, and the whole lineup waiting to get it done, processed, because we have the limited capacity right now. We're opening it up so that we invest in them, continue to do that. So turning unemployed young people into entrepreneurs. How? Just by financing. That's all we needed. Take one unemployed young person in Brussels. It's right here. Or your whatever home country, whatever city that you're coming from. Just think about an unemployed young person. Has brilliant business idea. He or she comes with the business idea, goes to a bank right in the city. Guess what will be the response from the bank? They probably look for the security to get him out because that doesn't make sense to them. Why this kid wants money from us? We don't do any money for them. This is not our job. And what is collateral? That's the first question will be asked. What is his background and so on? We don't have any background check in our system. It's a human being. That person is a human being is a good enough introduction for us. We can proceed from there. That's the start we make. So the whole problem that we created with the wrong conception. Conception about financing, conception about collateral, conception about job. And we have to undo all these things so that we can undo the system that we built ourselves. Then we created other kind of thing. Business. The business of making money. I said, forget it. We do business to solve problems. And we started doing that in Bangladesh. We created more than 60 such companies. And that's what Jeffrey was mentioning. And keep on adding more and more every day. We keep on creating businesses. But businesses of a very different kind. Business to solve problem. We have no intention of making money personally. It should be a sustainable business. It has enough money to earn so that it covers its cost, made a surplus. Surplus is plowed back into the system. Nobody takes any money. And we have small businesses, we have medium-sized business, we have nationwide businesses in that. And we call it social business, non-dividend company to solve human problems. That's what we do. Then we became other people became interested, big businesses became interested in the idea of social business. So they came and do partnership with us. Danone was the first one, French company, to do Grameen Danone company in Bangladesh to solve the problem of malnutrition. Malnutrition is a massive problem in Bangladesh. 48% of the children born in Bangladesh are malnourished. We can't do anything about it. We said, let's try. Create a social business. We found the yogurt as a vehicle, put all the micronutrients which are missing in the child into the yogurt. Made it a fortified yogurt, made it very cheap. Once you make it into social business, suddenly all your cost goes down. You don't need the frills, you don't need the impressive packaging or anything. Just go to the basic. And now we sell it, and children eat it. And once they eat it for 7 or 8 months, a cup a day, become a healthy child. So children love it because the taste that's put in. So this is a social business. Danone doesn't want to make money out of it as a profit. All the profit is plowed back into the system. Thank you very much.